Okay, let's unpack this. For what felt like forever, the ultimate aspiration, the classic American dream, was owning a home. It was really the definitive marker that you'd arrived, sort of the solid ground you built your future on. But lately, well, for a growing number of people, that cherished dream is starting to feel less like a pathway to stability and building wealth and honestly maybe more like a financial and emotional trap. It's prompting a pretty serious reevaluation for many, pushing them to reconsider if maybe, just maybe, renting offers a better quality of life, perhaps more financial freedom, and definitely less stress. So today we're going to dive deep into why this significant shift seems to be gaining momentum. We'll peel back the layers on those unexpected, often hidden costs that are driving some people away from ownership. And we'll also break down what the very latest data is revealing about the real estate market right now. I think you'll find some of the numbers and the perspectives quite surprising.
Yeah, and what makes this particular deep dive so compelling, I think, is that the material we're working with today, generously shared with us by you, one of our listeners, it provides such a powerful combination. We get that incredibly valuable personal perspective, the raw lived experience of individuals who actually ran into those unforeseen obstacles and frustrations that can come with home ownership. But then we also have the hard, broader market data, the statistics that show this isn't just like a few isolated cases of buyer's remorse or unhappiness. It really points to a much larger, more significant trend, a genuine shift happening across the country.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take this really interesting stack of information, blending the anecdotal with the analytical, and truly get to the heart of the realities behind owning a home in, well, the current economic and market climate. We want to analyze what the most recent numbers mean, not just for the market in the abstract, but very concretely for you, whether you're maybe thinking about buying your first home or perhaps considering selling a property you own, or maybe even if you're currently renting and just wondering if you should jump into the ownership pool. We're going to look at specific real-world examples and then back it up with the concrete data. And definitely stick with us throughout this deep dive, because later on, we have this quote from someone who went through the whole experience of owning and felt so strongly about it that they described the entire housing market as, and I'm quoting them directly here, kind of a scam.
Wow.
Yeah, we really need to spend some time understanding what could lead someone to such a powerful, disillusioned statement.
That specific quote is quite potent, isn't it? And it immediately raises a fundamental question for our discussion today. How well does that long-standing, deeply ingrained traditional narrative of homeownership, the one we've all been told, is the absolute path to success and security? How well does it actually hold up when you confront it with the actual day-to-day realities, the unexpected challenges, and the true costs in the current market environment?
Let's start right there with that reality check, because that's where our source material really kicks off. It presents a compelling case study, the story of a couple living down in Houston, Texas. Their experience is, I think, a really vivid illustration of what many people, particularly those among the younger generations like Gen Z and millennials who are just starting their homeownership journey, are finding themselves up against.
Right. So this couple, they made the decision to buy their home back in early 2022. And it's helpful to remember what things were like then. Remote work was still a huge factor for a lot of professionals, and there was this widespread desire for more personal space, maybe a dedicated home office or just a bigger environment since people were spending so much more time at home. And they seemed to find something that fit the bill and at the time looked relatively accessible financially. A three-bedroom house, it even had a pool, purchased for $390,000.
And they managed to secure what, by today's standards anyway, looks like a remarkably good mortgage rate for that period, 3.75%. This resulted in an initial monthly mortgage payment of $2,600. So when you look at this situation just on the surface, house with a pool, seems like a manageable payment, decent interest rate. It sounds like they were right on track with that classic path forward, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
The expectation was clear. Buy a home, start building that precious equity, and settle into a life of increasing stability and, financial security. They genuinely believed homeownership was the unequivocal way to go.
And based on their financial standing, that belief was certainly justified according to, well, conventional wisdom. The material notes they had a solid combined household income of $185,000 per year. So this meant they were far from struggling to meet that initial $2,600 mortgage payment. They had the financial capacity that, in theory, should have insulated them from many of the common affordability issues and made homeownership a relatively smooth, predictable, and beneficial experience. The fundamentals look pretty good.
But, as the source material vividly describes, This is precisely where the dream started colliding with the harsh reality. Those hidden costs, the constant unpredictable demands, and just the sheer headache of ongoing home maintenance quickly began to, chip away at that initially positive outlook. It revealed a side of homeownership they maybe hadn't fully anticipated.
Absolutely. The source uses a really apt metaphor to describe this experience, saying it felt like they were constantly playing whack-a-mole with issues. It wasn't, a single major crisis followed by a long period of calm. Instead, it was this relentless, unpredictable sequence of unexpected problems, each one demanding immediate and often expensive attention. You'd fix one thing, maybe breathe a sigh of relief, and then bam, something else would break.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting. And the source lists some pretty significant issues they face, not just minor nuisances. Can you break down what specifically went wrong for them?
Certainly. Among the problems listed was, well, a shocking $10,000 bill just to repair their air conditioning system. In a place like Houston, that's not exactly a luxury, right? It's a necessity, especially during the summer months. So that's a massive, unavoidable expense right out of the gate. On top of that, their pool developed a leak, costing them thousands more dollars to fix. They also needed to replace garage doors, which isn't a small expense either, and they suffered from significant plumbing issues. These weren't, inexpensive quick fixes. These were substantial multi-thousand-dollar unexpected expenses that just kept cropping up, demanding their attention and, well, draining their finances.
Oh, man. I can totally empathize with that whack-a-mole feeling. I actually had a somewhat similar situation years ago with a duplex investment property I owned before the pandemic craziness really took off.
Yeah.
On paper, it looked like a great deal. I bought it low, and it was cash flowing from day one. It was bringing in money consistently every month.
So financially, it seemed like a smart move then.
It did. Yeah. But just like this couple, it had constant, consistent problems every single month. I mean, without fail, there was something that needed fixing or attention. A leaky faucet here, a running toilet there, a fence board loose, a gutter problem. It was always something. Nothing was ever so catastrophic that I ended up losing money on the property overall when I eventually sold it, thankfully. But the sheer amount of time, effort, and just mental energy spent dealing with it, calling contractors, getting quotes, coordinating repairs, dealing with tenant issues related to the maintenance. It was just an enormous headache. It was that constant low-level drain of managing the property that eventually made me decide, you know what, I'm done. The hassle and the aggravation were a huge part of the cost, even if the numbers technically worked out okay.
And your experience perfectly illustrates the point the source material makes about factoring in the cost of that hassle and aggravation and the time, the emotional labor of homeownership that's almost never included in those simple buy versus rent calculations people often make. It's a very real cost, though.
It absolutely is. And the source material actually draws an interesting comparison here, bringing up homeowners association fees, right?
Yeah.
Those often maligned HOA fees you pay with condos or townhouses. While people frequently complain about these fees being high or restrictive, the source points out a critical benefit. Those fees often cover the very types of major structural or external repairs that hit this Houston couple so hard. Things like roof replacements, major pool repairs, or fixing common garage issues.
That's a crucial distinction that's often overlooked. With an HOA, you're paying a predictable monthly amount, and yeah, while it can add up, that money is pooled to handle those massive, sudden capital expenditures that come with maintaining the building structure, shared amenities like a pool, or external elements. The air conditioning system is typically still the individual owner's responsibility, yes, but many of the other potential 4 or 5-figure headaches are often covered by that fee structure.
Exactly. It essentially provides a form of shared insurance against large, unpredictable bills for major components of the property. It introduces a degree of financial predictability that detached homeownership often lacks. It's not necessarily better or worse, I suppose, but it's a fundamentally different lifestyle and financial commitment that people need to consider carefully when choosing between types of properties. And as the source material makes very clear, all these thousands of dollars in repair costs for the Houston couple came directly on top of their $2,600 monthly mortgage payment. That's where the budget doesn't just get strained. It can completely break.
Right, it's the compounding effect. You budget for the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, the PITI part of the mortgage, but then you have to layer on these completely unpredictable, often significant repair costs. Finding another 10 grand for the AC or a few thousand for a pool leak, suddenly that manageable $2,600 payment turns into something far less affordable when these things hit, one after another.
And this accumulation of unexpected costs and just constant stress, is what eventually led the Houston couple to a pretty significant decision, which is detailed in Section 3 of the material. Ditching the dream and shifting back to renting, despite their very healthy combined income, they decided they were finished with homeownership. They just wanted out.
Yeah, their motivation, as outlined, is incredibly telling. Fundamentally, they simply no longer wanted the burden of owning the house. They'd experienced the downsides firsthand and concluded it just wasn't worth it for them. They discovered they strongly preferred the flexibility that renting provides, the ease of being able to move without the immense transaction costs, the logistical hassle, and the market risk associated with selling a property. But maybe most importantly, they really craved that hands-off approach. The profound relief that comes from knowing that if the HVAC system fails or the plumbing backs up and the pool starts leaking again, it is the landlord's problem to fix and pay for, not theirs. That predictability and freedom from maintenance responsibility became incredibly appealing after what they'd been through.
And this decision directly challenges that long-standing, almost sacred piece of conventional financial wisdom. Buying is always superior to renting, because when you buy, you build equity and get money back when you sell, while every dollar you pay in rent is simply gone forever. The source material takes this head-on.
It does. It acknowledges this point as fair, and yeah, on its surface it is. Rent is an ongoing expense that you don't recoup directly in the form of an asset you own.
But the absolutely crucial counterpoint, and the one that the Houston couple's experience highlights so vividly, is that you must, in any honest comparison, factor in all the money you spend while owning the home. And this isn't just the mortgage payment. It's the property taxes, which can definitely rise, the insurance, which can rise significantly, especially in areas with weather risks, and critically, all the maintenance, repairs, and capital expenditures.
Precisely. If, as the source material suggests, you find yourself spending tens of thousands of dollars per year on maintaining the property, fixing those unexpected problems, and eventually replacing big-ticket items like roofs, HVAC systems, or appliances, well, then the money you eventually recover when you sell the house might very well just be the money you already poured back into the property during the years you owned it.
So you're not necessarily realizing a true profit in the way many people imagine, not after you've accounted for all those ongoing, often unpredictable expenses. And, like we discussed with my duplex, you absolutely cannot ignore the cost of the hassle and aggravation and the time involved. The mental burden, the hours spent coordinating, the stress of unexpected bills that has a real cost on your life and well-being. For this couple, they just reached a point where that cost, added to the financial one, outweighed the perceived benefits of ownership for them.
And their decision to go back to renting signifies a real shift in their financial priorities and goals. The source material details what they are looking forward to with renting. The ability to put more money aside consistently each month because they aren't constantly draining their savings or emergency fund for home repairs. They want to redirect that cash flow towards saving for long-term goals. Enjoyable things like vacations, being able to go out for dinners without those budgeting anxieties, and very importantly for them, funding their 11-year-old son's college education. They feel they can achieve these personal and family financial goals far more effectively by not being tethered to the unpredictable and potentially huge costs of home maintenance.
And this is the context in which that powerful quote emerges. After their experience looking at the entire picture, they weren't just saying this house was a problem. They were saying it just feels like the whole housing market's kind of a scam.
Yeah, that statement, while obviously emotionally charged, it really speaks to a feeling of deep disillusionment with the traditional promise of homeownership. It's probably not that they necessarily believe there's like a literal criminal fraud happening, but rather that the actual experience they went through, the constant unexpected costs, the drain on resources, the stress, it felt so dramatically different from the idealized promise of the traditional American dream of homeownership. The perceived benefits they were sort of sold on, the automatic appreciation, the effortless wealth building of the security, it just didn't match the reality of unexpected financial drains, constant work, and unpredictability for them.
It felt like a transaction where they didn't receive the expected value or return on their massive investment of money, time, and energy.
Yeah.
It highlights a growing disconnect for some between the ingrained cultural narrative about homeownership and the lived reality. And as the source material implies, this connects to a changing definition of the American dream itself for many people, one that might prioritize things like flexibility, work-life balance, pursuing passions, or accumulating personal wealth through investments other than real estate goals, which may or may not require or benefit from homeownership.
And this is a critical point often missed in discussions that just focus on affordability for first-time buyers. The source material notes that people who have already owned homes, who have gone through the full experience, are now deciding to opt out and return to renting. This indicates that it's not solely about the financial barrier to entry for new buyers. It's about a broader, fundamental reevaluation of whether homeownership is the preferred or most beneficial path, even for those who are financially capable of sustaining it.
Okay, so we've explored the powerful personal perspective, and the
Yeah.
reasons why some are reconsidering or even ditching home ownership. Now, let's sort of zoom out and look at the broader market dynamics because the source material provides some recent, pretty compelling data that suggests this isn't just a few isolated stories. There's a very significant shift happening on a large scale. This brings us to looking at the shifting sands of the market.
Yeah, this is where a recent Redfin report that the source material highlights provides some absolutely striking numbers. According to this report, the United States housing market currently finds itself in a situation where there are approximately 500,000 more sellers actively listing their homes than there are buyers actively looking to purchase them.
500,000 more sellers than buyers. Wow. That sounds like an enormous imbalance in supply and demand.
It really is. The report specifically states that this represents the most significant imbalance on record since Redfin began tracking this particular metric. The estimated figures are around 1.9 million home sellers nationwide compared to a pool of only about 1.5 million potential home buyers. When you do the math on that, it translates to 33.7% more sellers than there are buyers in the market right now.
33.7%. That's a huge difference. How does that percentage compare to, say, just a year ago? What did the picture look like then?
Right, and that's where the magnitude and the speed of this shift really become apparent. Just 12 months prior, sellers also outnumbered buyers, but the disparity was vastly smaller. The difference was only 6.5%. So going from a 6.5% imbalance to a 33.7% imbalance in just 1 year, that's a truly dramatic and rapid acceleration. It strongly suggests that a substantial number of homeowners have decided to list their properties relatively recently, while the pool of active, willing, or able buyers has either significantly shrunk or become much, much more hesitant and cautious.
So these numbers aren't just abstract statistics. They seem to be a direct reflection of the trends we were just talking about. More people deciding to sell, maybe overwhelmed by ownership costs or seeking flexibility, combined with buyers who are potentially priced out by high rates or prices, or are simply pausing because they see uncertainty.
Precisely. The data also offers some historical context to underline the current situation. The 1.9 million homes currently listed for sale represent the highest level of available inventory since March 2020, right at the very beginning of the pandemic when the market was briefly disrupted before it really took off. And the 1.5 million active home buyers, well, that's the lowest number of potential buyers recorded since way back in 2013.
Wow. So we have the highest number of homes on the market in 4 years, coinciding with the lowest number of potential buyers in over a decade. That combination creates a very specific dynamic, doesn't it? An undeniable picture of a market that is undergoing a significant and relatively rapid transformation, marked by that large and widening gap between how many people want to sell and how many are ready, willing, and able to buy.
hmm And this imbalance naturally leads to the next question, which the source material addresses. Does this mean we are officially in a buyer's market yet? And how exactly do we define that term in real estate anyway?
Right. The traditional definition used widely in the real estate industry usually focuses on inventory levels, correct? Like months of supply.
Yes, that's the standard metric. The classic real estate industry definition of a buyer's market is typically described as having 6 months or more of available housing inventory on the market, calculated based on the current sales pace. This level of supply relative to demand is traditionally seen as the point where buyers gain significant leverage and negotiation power. And the source does note that, technically based purely on that nationwide sales pace metric, the market across the entire country doesn't currently meet that specific 6-month standard.
Okay, so if we're sticking strictly to the most conventional sort of textbook definition based on months of supply, maybe not quite there yet universally.
Yeah. By that one specific metric? No, not nationwide. However, the source material makes a pretty compelling argument that based on the sheer number of sellers relative to buyers, the 33.7% disparity we just discussed, and the rapid increase in that disparity over the last year, well, many experienced market watchers would easily call this a buyer market right now. The argument is that the fundamental imbalance itself and the strong trajectory it's on means that in most individual markets across the country, buyers now hold most of the power.
That certainly makes intuitive sense. I mean, if you're a buyer and you have a much larger pool of homes to choose from and significantly fewer other buyers competing for those homes, you are naturally in a much stronger negotiating position, right? You can be more selective, take your time, potentially negotiate more on price or terms.
And there's additional data in the source material that strongly supports this shift in leverage. It points to how long homes are now taking to sell compared to the recent past. According to that Redfin data cited, 44% of homes listed back in April were still on the market after 60 days.
44%. That's nearly half of the listings just sitting there for 2 full months or longer. That's a significant chunk of inventory just lingering.
And that 44% figure represents the highest amount of listings taking that long to sell since 2020. The source material speculates on the primary reasons behind this extended time on market, suggesting that a major factor is that many sellers are simply slow to adjust their expectations to the new reality. They might still be anchored to the sky-high prices and rapid sales pace they saw during the peak pandemic market conditions of 2021 and early 2022. Or perhaps they're influenced by outdated information, or maybe even misinformation circulating online that suggests values are still booming universally.
Ah, right. So they're remembering the days when you could list your house on a Friday and have multiple cash offers by Monday morning, often well over your asking price. Those days seem gone in most places.
Exactly. The source material describes these sellers as living in the past, kind of holding on to price expectations that are no longer supported by current market conditions. Buyers, on the other hand, are described as living in the now. They are acutely aware of the current interest rates, the current price levels, and the growing inventory. They are much more grounded in the present market reality, and they are far less willing to pay those peak-of-the-bubble prices. This disconnect between seller expectations and buyer willingness is what's resulting in homes sitting longer on the market.
Which brings us directly to some practical advice outlined in Section 6, advice for sellers. If sellers are indeed living in the past and, as the source puts it, time is not on their side in this market, what concrete steps should they be taking?
Well, the core message here is pretty unmistakable. Many sellers will absolutely need to make a conscious decision to reset their expectations regarding price and potentially other terms as well. The market landscape has changed fundamentally from just a year or two ago, and what a home was worth during that peak frenzy might simply not be what it commands in today's environment with fewer buyers and more competition from other listings.
So the strategy of just putting a for sale sign in the yard with a high price and waiting for the bidding war is, in most places, no longer a viable approach.
In most markets, precisely not. The source material strongly emphasizes the critical importance of sellers doing thorough, objective research on their specific local market before they even list their home. It's not enough to just look at what neighbors are listing their homes for. You need to dig deeper and see what comparable homes in your immediate neighborhood are actually selling for. Check the final sale price, not just the initial list price. Find out how long similar homes are taking to go under contract from the date they were listed. And very importantly, research how much of a price reduction homes in your area are typically needing to take off their initial asking price before they finally sell.
Right, that's a key distinction. The list price is just the seller's wish, isn't it? The sold price is what the market actually valued the home at on that day. That's the real data point sellers need to understand.
Absolutely. And the call to action for anyone currently considering selling or maybe already listed is quite direct. Time is not on your side in this market, generally speaking. This source suggests that if you are planning to sell, doing it sooner rather than later is usually the advisable approach, acknowledging, of course, that the absolute peak for most areas has likely already passed. This is maybe less true in some specific micro-markets or areas that are still seeing strong population or job growth, perhaps some pockets of the Midwest or certain Sunbelt cities that still have unique dynamics mentioned elsewhere. But for the majority, the earlier you act, the better position you might be in relative to future market softening.
Okay. And for those sellers whose homes have already been sitting on the market for a while, say for more than a month or two, what's the recommended course of action based on this analysis?
The source material is quite unambiguous here. If your listing has been stagnant, sitting on the market longer than average for your area, then a big price reduction is almost certainly necessary to get it sold in the current climate. While other strategies might help incrementally, better staging, improved marketing, a significant price cut is identified as the single most effective lever you have to signal to buyers that you've adjusted to the market reality and are serious about selling. Continuing to wait, just hoping for a buyer to magically appear at the original price, is unlikely to work and simply incurs more holding costs for the seller.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. In a market with increasing inventory and patient buyers, a home that's been sitting starts to signal that it's overpriced. And that signal can only really be overcome with a meaningful price correction. Okay, so that's the advice for sellers navigating this shift. What about the other side of the equation? Section 7 covers advice for buyers. Are opportunities starting to emerge for them?
Yes, the source material definitely presents a more positive outlook for potential buyers in several key ways. It states that right now, in terms of the sheer amount of available homes to choose from the inventory, it is one of the best times to be a home buyer since before the pandemic.
Right. More houses to look at means less frantic pressure, more options, and less likelihood of having to compromise on exactly what you want.
Exactly. The increased inventory gives buyers significantly more breathing room. Now, prices are still characterized as high overall, and that's an important reality check, of course. However, the source notes that they are starting to come down in a lot of areas. While the Redfin prediction mentioned for a nationwide price drop by the end of 2025 is a rather measly 1%, which isn't exactly cause for huge celebration.
Yeah, that single-digit national prediction doesn't sound very exciting, does it?
It really doesn't. But the source highlights a crucial point. Many specific local markets are already seeing much larger price corrections than that national average. It explicitly mentions areas in Florida, for instance, where prices are down over 10% from their peak levels seen back in 2022. This just underscores that real estate is always fundamentally local, and significant opportunities might exist even if the national numbers look less dramatic.
So the national average can definitely mask some pretty substantial price drops happening in certain regions. Got it.
Absolutely. And the source introduces a concept it calls the magic trio, or maybe the magic bullet, for improving individual affordability over time for a potential buyer. It's a powerful combination of three distinct factors converging. One, home prices in your target area actually going down. Two, your individual income increasing over time. And three, your individual debt decreasing over time.
The convergence of a more favorable market and improving personal finances. That seems like the ideal scenario for affordability to really improve for an individual, doesn't it?
Precisely. If you can align those three factors, if prices soften in the area you want to buy, while your salary grows and you manage to pay down other debts, then a home that might have felt completely out of reach and unaffordable maybe a year ago might all of a sudden be affordable by the end of 2025 or sometime in the near future. So the advice for buyers, based on this, is to keep a close eye on the specific homes or neighborhoods they are interested in, because the affordability equation could change significantly in their favor as these market and personal financial trends play out.
And the source material points to specific geographic areas that are already exhibiting the strongest buyer-friendly conditions, particularly those with that high seller-to-buyer ratio we talked about.
Yes, the list includes markets that are currently seeing the best availability and options for buyers. These are identified as Miami, Florida, West Palm Beach, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Austin, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, Tampa, Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, Nevada, Orlando, Florida, and Nashville, Tennessee. And it's very notable, as the source points out, that fully half of that list consists of markets in Florida. That's a clear indicator of just how significant the shift has been in that state, perhaps unwinding some of the really rapid price growth seen there during the pandemic boom.
And it even provides the specific, striking numbers for Miami. Approximately 197% more sellers than buyers, roughly 21,500 sellers actively listing versus only about 7,300 active buyers.
Yeah.
That kind of disparity gives buyers an immense amount of leverage.
It certainly does. For buyers in those specific markets, the conditions in terms of inventory and seller competition haven't been this favorable for a very, very long time. However, while the market might be improving and becoming a better time to buy in these areas, that doesn't automatically mean it's the absolute best time for every individual or in every location. And this is where Section 8 introduces a crucial note of buyer caution.
Okay.
Okay.
So despite the improving picture, buyers shouldn't necessarily rush in with blind optimism.
Exactly. The source offers a strong cautionary note here. Don't confuse better with best. Just because conditions are improving from the extreme seller's market we saw a couple of years ago, don't let agents or maybe outdated narratives pressure you into believing that right now is the absolute pinnacle of opportunity. The analysis suggests that the inventory of homes for sale is likely to continue to climb as more sellers adjust expectations and list their properties, and crucially, as buyers continue to sort of boycott the market at current price levels and interest rates. This continued imbalance and buyer hesitation will likely lead to bigger and bigger price reductions from sellers over time as reality sets in.
So the trend suggests that holding off, being patient, could potentially lead to even more favorable conditions down the road for buyers.
That's the core recommendation, unless, as the source puts it, you stumble upon the absolute perfect house, the one that perfectly meets all your needs, is in the ideal location, and just feels like the right move, regardless of minor market fluctuations. For most buyers, though, the advice is to seriously consider continuing to wait it out. Watch prices in your desired areas, especially in markets like Florida that are already seeing significant softening.
And how long are we talking about for this potential waiting period? Is this a matter of months or years, according to the analysis?
The source suggests that waiting potentially anywhere from 6 months to a year, or maybe even up to 2 years, could result in discovering an even better opportunity in terms of price and available options. This is particularly relevant, it notes, for first-time buyers who often have more flexibility regarding their timeline. Unlike someone who needs to sell their current home to finance the next purchase, first-time buyers aren't usually on a strict deadline dictated by a prior sale. They've already waited their whole lives to buy, arguably, so waiting a little longer, watching the market evolve, might allow them to capture more significant price declines or find a property that's been on the market long enough for the seller to be very motivated to negotiate.
So for those without an immediate need to move, patience is framed as a potentially very rewarding strategy. And the source even offers a specific strategy for buyers to employ once prices have come down further and the market has softened more significantly.
Yes, once the market has shifted further in favor of buyers and prices have demonstrably dropped in their target areas, the suggested strategy is to become quite active and make numerous lowball offers on properties you are interested in. The expectation built into the strategy is that, yeah, the majority of these offers will likely be rejected outright. Sellers will still resist significantly lower offers initially, that's natural. However, the goal of making many offers is to increase the probability of getting one accepted at a price that is significantly below the current asking price and represents a genuine deal relative to recent sales. It's kind of a high-volume strategy acknowledging low individual success rates, but aiming for a substantial win when one offer finally lands.
Interesting. So the message for buyers is essentially, be patient, observe the market closely, let the trends develop, and then when conditions align further, potentially become very aggressive with your offers. It's an interesting and potentially effective approach in a shifting market. Now, let's look at the psychological side. Despite some of the improving market conditions for buyers, surveys suggest there's still a lot of underlying anxiety. Right? Section 9 discusses buyer sentiment versus those crucial affordability concerns.
Yeah, there's definitely a mixed bag of signals coming from potential buyers right now. The source mentions a recent TD annual survey which found that a relatively high percentage, 74% of prospective buyers, reported feeling optimistic about the current housing market. Additionally, nearly 47% indicated they're actively saving money specifically for a down payment.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds quite encouraging. It suggests people haven't totally given up on the idea of home ownership. They're still engaged, they're planning, and there's a reservoir of hope out there.
It is positive in the sense that it shows continued desire and engagement with the goal of homeownership, absolutely. However, the source provides a crucial caution against interpreting this optimism as some kind of green light to be overzealous or to act too quickly. It notes some caveats about the survey itself. For example, it was based on only 1,000 respondents, which means it might not be perfectly representative of the entire potential buyer pool across the vastness of the U.S. The survey also found that 79% felt their personal financial situation was stable, and a significant 85% still felt that homeownership was important, which really reinforces how deeply ingrained that American dream idea remains, despite all the challenges.
Right. But underneath that layer of general optimism and belief in the dream, the actual concrete financial worries are still very, very present for the majority of these prospective buyers.
Absolutely. And the source highlights the major concerns that definitely temper that optimism revealed in the same survey. A substantial 64% of prospective buyers expressed significant concern about their ability to afford a home, specifically due to the combination of high prices and current interest rates. That's a clear majority worried about the primary cost barrier to entry, the purchase price, and the cost of borrowing the money itself.
Okay, that level of concern about price and rates, is pretty much expected, I suppose, given where things have been over the last couple of years. But there's another concern that hits much closer to the reality check faced by that Houston couple we talked about, isn't there?
Yes, and the source material explicitly identifies this second concern as potentially the most critical point for buyers to consider right now. The survey found that 62% of prospective buyers are worried about being able to afford other expenses on top of purchasing a home. This concern is exacerbated, the source notes, by persistent inflation, which drives up the cost of pretty much everything else in life.
So it's not just the mortgage payment and the principal loan amount. It's being able to afford groceries, gas, utilities, saving for retirement, maybe childcare, plus all the unpredictable and ongoing costs that come specifically with owning a property, the maintenance, unexpected repairs, potentially rising property taxes and insurance premiums, that whole bundle.
Exactly. And the source states unequivocally that this specific concern, the ability to manage all of life's other necessary expenses, including those extra and often unpredictable costs associated with owning and maintaining a home, on top of making the mortgage payment, should be the biggest concern on everybody's mind right now, especially for individuals contemplating their first home purchase. It directly links back to the core issue experienced by the Houston couple and the potential for significant disillusionment with homeownership when the actual cost of living in and maintaining the property far exceeds initial expectations or budgets.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, while you can calculate and budget for a fixed mortgage payment, if you have a fixed rate anyway, trying to budget for a sudden $10,000 HVAC repair or a multi-thousand-dollar plumbing issue is almost impossible. And when everything else is more expensive because of inflation, those unexpected home costs are even harder to absorb without severely impacting your quality of life or your ability to save for other crucial goals. It adds a significant layer of financial risk that many new homeowners might not fully grasp until they're facing it head-on.
Yeah, it introduces financial volatility into the picture that isn't always part of the idealized homeownership narrative, definitely.
Okay, let's shift our focus now from potential buyers to existing homeowners, because the source material highlights a significant and growing trend among people who already own homes, particularly those who might have locked in very favorable low mortgage rates and are understandably hesitant to move. This brings us to Section 10, borrowing against equity and the rise of HLAs.
Yeah, this is another area where the data presented in the source material is quite revealing about current homeowner behavior. Home equity lines of credit, or HELOC, are becoming increasingly prevalent. The average outstanding balance on a HELOC actually surpassed $45,000 in 2024.
Over $45,000 on average per ELOC. Wow, that's a substantial amount of additional debt tied directly to people's homes.
It really is. On a nationwide scale, total ETLOC debt went up by 7.2%, reaching approximately $360 billion held by Americans collectively. And that average balance increased from $42,000 to $45,000 in just the last year alone, indicating that not only are more people taking them out, but they're also borrowing larger amounts on average when they do.
So the total volume of this type of debt is growing, and the typical amount borrowed by individual homeowners is also increasing.
And the frequency of these loans being originated is frankly quite striking. The source material points out a surprising statistic. Since 2023, for every 2 brand new primary mortgages originated in the U.S., there has been 1 new HELOC loan originated.
Hold on a second. 1 new AELOC for every 2 new mortgages. Does that mean nearly half of the people taking out a brand new mortgage are also simultaneously getting an ELOC, or does it mean just overall originations?
Well, the phrasing suggests a ratio of originations, 1 AELOC for every 2 purchase mortgages. It doesn't necessarily mean the same person is getting both simultaneously in all cases, but it highlights the sheer volume. A very large number of homeowners, new and existing, are leveraging the equity in their home right now. The source characterizes this trend as pretty insane, highlighting how rapidly and widely homeowners are accessing their equity through these lines of credit.
That is still a remarkable statistic, whichever way you slice it. It suggests a significant shift in how people view and utilize the equity in their homes. So why is this happening? What are the primary drivers behind this rapid increase in HELOC usage? Section 11 explores the reasons and, critically, the significant risks involved.
The source material identifies 2 main forces really propelling this trend. The first is simply the increased availability of equity. Home values appreciated significantly in many areas over the past few years, creating this pool of theoretical equity for homeowners to tap into. And frankly, lenders are very actively marketing and making it pretty easy to access this equity. The second, and equally critical driver, is the high cost of living. Persistent inflation and rising expenses mean that many people feel a squeeze on their finances and are looking for ways to access funds to cover expenses, deal with unexpected costs, perhaps exactly like the Houston couple's repairs, or simply maintain their desired lifestyle.
Right. So you have people sitting on perceived assets, their home equity, and facing real pressure on their day-to-day budgets from rising costs.
Yeah.
That combination creates a strong incentive to borrow against the home. I can see that. What are the most common ways people are actually using these HELOCs?
The source lists several common uses and offers some pretty sharp analysis on the financial wisdom behind them. One frequently cited use is debt consolidation. The source calls this the dumbest thing you can possibly do with a HELOC.
Wow, okay, that's strong language.
Yeah.
Why is using a HELOC for debt consolidation considered such a bad idea?
Because it involves taking unsecured debt-like balances on high-interest credit cards, medical bills, or personal loans, and converting it into secured debt that is directly tied to your primary residence, your home. Before consolidation, if you failed to pay your credit card bill, the worst outcome was, damage to your credit score and dealing with collections agencies. Annoying, but you didn't lose your house. With the ELOC used for consolidation, if you fail to make the payments on that ELOC, you are putting your home at risk of foreclosure. It turns debt that wasn't secured by your most valuable asset into debt that absolutely is. The source notes that lenders often sell ELOCs this way, highlighting lower interest rates compared to credit cards, and unfortunately, people sometimes fall for the perceived savings without fully grasping the dramatically increased risk to their actual home.
That's a crucial warning. You're potentially trading a higher interest rate for a far, far higher level of risk. What about renovations and home improvement projects? That seems like a more natural fit for using home equity, perhaps.
Renovations and home projects are indeed another very common use for HELOCs. People borrow against their equity to fund upgrades or repairs. However, the source material also questions the wisdom of this approach if you don't have the cash reserves to pay for the renovation outright. It poses the question, if you can't afford the renovation with your existing savings, you probably shouldn't be borrowing against your home to do that.
Because if you can't save up the money for the project beforehand, adding another monthly payment on top of your mortgage might create an unsustainable financial burden down the line.
Exactly. It suggests that if you can't organically save for it, you might not really have the financial capacity to comfortably take on more debt tied to your home. The source also mentions using HELOCs for lifestyle expenses or general spending, things like funding vacations, paying for weddings, or simply covering shortfalls in the monthly budget. Essentially, using the built-up equity in your home as a substitute for saving for these things or managing within your means.
So kind of treating your house like a giant ATM or a flexible piggy bank for discretionary spending.
In some instances, that appears to be the case, yeah. However, regardless of the use, the significant risks associated with taking out a ELOC are profound and really cannot be overstated. The most immediate risk is that you are adding a second loan obligation directly tied to your home on top of your primary mortgage. And here's the critical part. Failure to make payments on either loan your first mortgage or your ELOC can result in foreclosure proceedings on your home. The source adds that even failure to pay other crucial home-related costs like property taxes or homeowners insurance can lead to foreclosure. A ELOC simply introduces another risk factor into the equation of homeownership, effectively doubling the paths by which you could potentially lose your property.
It essentially creates two potential points of failure, either of which could jeopardize your primary asset. That's scary. And many ELOCs, unlike traditional fixed-rate mortgages, have variable interest rates, don't they?
They often do, yes. This adds another layer of unpredictability and risk. The interest rate on a HELOC can fluctuate based on market conditions, typically tied to the prime rate. This means your minimum monthly payment can go up over time, potentially significantly, making it much harder to budget for and afford if interest rates rise after you've taken out the loan. This variable rate risk is a major concern that homeowners must fully understand before borrowing.
And the source material points to the lending industry's role in promoting these products, particularly targeting homeowners who are sitting on those low-rate mortgages from years ago and don't want to move and give them up.
Yes, lenders are very actively marketing HELOCs to this specific group of homeowners. They recognize that homeowners with 3% or 4% mortgage rates are largely locked in financially and aren't likely to sell and buy a new home at 7% or 8% rates. So, lenders position HELOCs as the second best thing to moving, promoting the idea that you can renovate your current home to make it feel new or access needed cash without giving up your precious low mortgage rate. The source material is critical of this marketing, reiterating that if you can't afford the renovation or expense through savings, borrowing against your home is likely a financially precarious decision, regardless of the convenience offered by a HELOC.
And using borrowed equity for renovations carries an additional risk, especially in a market where values might be softening or even declining in certain areas like we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. That's the risk of going underwater on your home. If you borrow a significant amount against your equity to fund renovations or other expenses, and then home values in your specific area decrease, you could end up in a situation where the combined total of your outstanding primary mortgage balance plus your HELOC balance is actually more than the current market value of your home. Being underwater severely limits your options if you need it to sell and can create significant financial stress.
The source notes that this trend of increasing HELOC balances isn't confined to just a few regions. Balances are apparently increasing in all states across the country, with some areas seeing double-digit percentage jumps. This indicates a widespread adoption of this borrowing strategy, despite the inherent risks involved.
Which makes the potential macroeconomic implications more concerning, potentially. A large number of homeowners taking on additional, potentially variable rate debt secured by their homes increases their vulnerability to things like interest rate hikes, job loss, or declines in home values.
And contributing to homeowners' willingness to tap into their equity this way might be a distorted perception of their home's value, potentially fueled by misleading information. Which brings us neatly to Section 12.
Absolutely. The source material highlights how external information sources, particularly those linked to the lending and real estate industries, can inadvertently or perhaps even intentionally create a misleading impression of home values, leading homeowners to feel safer borrowing against that perceived value. As we discussed, lenders actively promote HELOCs by showcasing a desired lifestyle, the shiny new kitchen, the luxurious bathroom, the relaxing vacation funded by borrowing against equity, implicitly relying on the assumption that your home is doing all the work for you because its value is constantly appreciating, making this borrowing feel low risk or even smart.
Right, they're selling a vision of effortless wealth access based on the idea of continuous guaranteed appreciation.
Yes, and that narrative can be incredibly powerful. The source provides a very specific, relatable example of how even tools that seem official or reliable can contribute to this potentially misleading picture. The anecdote describes receiving regular emails, maybe from Zillow or Redfin, or even services linked to systems like the MLS or tax appraisal data that consistently state that the value of their home is going up, often providing a specific optimistic number.
Yeah, I get those. That sounds very official and reassuring. You get an email saying, your home is now estimated to be worth X and it's gone up by Y, and it feels like solid validation of your equity.
Right. It gives you a number that makes accessing $40,000 or $50,000 of equity feel like a perfectly safe decision because, hey, value is rising and I'm just using a small portion of that gain, right?
Mhm.
But the reality observed on the ground in that same neighborhood starkly contradicted these automated valuations. The source notes that they were simultaneously seeing their neighbors trying to sell very similar properties, maybe even in the same building or on the same block, and those properties were not selling quickly and were requiring continuous price reductions just to attract buyers.
Oh. So the automated tool or email said your value is increasing, maybe significantly, but the actual real-world sales data in your immediate vicinity shows homes are sitting and prices are coming down or needing to be cut just to get them moved. That's a big disconnect.
Exactly. The conclusion drawn is that these automated valuation tools or marketing messages, regardless of their data source, may be, perhaps unintentionally, designed to make people believe that the value of their home is always going up, regardless of the nuanced and sometimes declining market reality actually unfolding around them. They perpetuate a narrative that encourages borrowing against equity by painting an overly rosy and potentially inaccurate picture of the underlying asset's current value and market liquidity.
That's a really powerful and cautionary point. It means you really can't blindly trust every automated valuation you receive or every marketing message suggesting your home's value is endlessly climbing, especially if it's tied to a product trying to get you to borrow, like a HELOC.
The source material strongly emphasizes the need for homeowners to do your own research and see what's happening with your own eyes in their specific local market. Don't just rely on a number that appears in an email or on a single website. Look at actual sold comparable properties on public real estate sites. Talk to local agents who are actively listing and selling in your neighborhood. Track the listing history of properties for sale nearby to see if they are taking price cuts and how long they sit. You need to verify market conditions and valuations independently.
And to circle back to the HELOC discussion, the source basically reiterates the advice we heard earlier for potential buyers,
Yeah.
but applying it here to existing homeowners considering borrowing. Save the money instead of get a HELOC.
Hmm.
If you have a project you want to do, try to save the cash for it rather than immediately resorting to borrowing against your home and introducing that whole additional layer of risk we talked about.
Hmm. It's a fundamental choice between the perceived convenience of quick access to funds versus the greater financial safety and control that comes from saving and paying cash, thereby protecting your primary asset from additional leverage and risk.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the current housing landscape. We began with that really powerful personal story of a couple's disillusionment with homeownership due to unexpected and significant costs, and discussed the reasons why they ultimately decided that renting offered a better path for them. We then looked at the compelling market data that confirms this isn't just an isolated experience, showing a dramatic and rapid shift in the U.S. housing market, with a growing imbalance of sellers significantly outnumbering buyers nationwide. We explored what that imbalance means for both sellers, who likely need to adjust their expectations and prices, and for buyers who are seeing increasing inventory and leverage, making it potentially a better market for them, although patience is still advised. And finally, we delved into the rising trend of existing homeowners tapping into their equity through HELOCs, highlighting the substantial risks involved, particularly with things like consolidating unsecured debt and how potentially misleading information about home values might be contributing to this risky behavior.
Yeah, to try and bring all these threads together, what this deep dive into the source material really reveals is that the long-held traditional narrative of homeownership as an automatic and guaranteed path to wealth and stability is being fundamentally challenged for many people by the unpredictable and often underestimated reality of ongoing maintenance costs, rising expenses, and just the sheer hassle involved. The market is clearly in a state of significant transition, moving decisively away from that frenzied seller's market towards one where buyers have considerably more options and power, even if nationwide prices aren't exactly plummeting uniformly just yet. This requires a significant reset at expectations for those looking to sell and suggests that patience and strategic action may be rewarded for those looking to buy. And simultaneously, among existing homeowners, there's this widespread and rapidly increasing reliance on borrowing against home equity via HELOCs, a trend that introduces substantial financial risk and seems partly fueled by potentially inaccurate or overly optimistic perceptions of home value appreciation.
So the very definition of the dream is perhaps undergoing a significant evolution. The market is undeniably moving in a direction that favors patience, particularly for buyers. And accessing the perceived wealth locked in your home seems easier than ever, but potentially much riskier than many might realize.
Yeah, navigating today's complex and shifting housing landscape, whether you're looking to buy, sell, or just stay put, requires a willingness to look beyond those ingrained assumptions, critically evaluate marketing messages, and really do your own diligent research to understand the true costs and market dynamics in your specific situation.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider as you process all of this information today. If the traditional view of homeownership is being challenged for fundamental, cost-related reasons, and even seemingly reliable tools and industry messaging can paint a misleading picture of market values, how should you define your own personal housing goals, whether that includes ownership, renting, or maybe something else entirely, and what specific steps will you take to gather the truly trustworthy information you need to make the right decision for your own financial future in today's complex market?